Okay, that looks better. Cool, let's dive into it. We're going to talk about the basics of how light works in this next series of lectures, which will be covering light and color. We're not going to do color just yet because you got a little bit about light before you start diving into that. So when you're doing light, you need to first learn, I guess, the basics of how light works, which is super obvious as I say it, and then you're going to learn how it interacts with the basic shapes. The basic shapes by which I mean like squares, right? Like there's different surfaces like a square, triangle, or round, right? These are your three basic shapes. And as you learn how light works, you're going to have to start to learn how to think in 3D with your environments and figures so you can understand where these shapes are happening. So I'm sure you've heard, think of your, whatever you're drawing in forms or shapes. Like, if I'm doing like an arm, right? Here's the basis of an arm, right? And there's the hand, boop, boop, boop. You might break this down into like, say, a cylinder, right? 2 cylinders, maybe like a ball up here. And why this is important, why a lot of people mention this, is because this is how you have to think when you light it, which we'll see in a second as I get into how light interacts with these basic forms. Right? Pretty simple so far. So, turn this off, and actually, no, we'll leave it on. And what do you guys want for light? Let's use yellow. I feel like a good light color. I like that. Okay. So, here's the basics of how light works. This will depend on its intensity, but let's say as we begin that light is just coming down from this direction at a very consistent and strong wave, right? Like say next to a window or whatever. How light will work, let's grab this one. Yeah, that's better. Is there's going to be a focal point. We'll start with this circle over here. Right? And then from here, it'll radiate out to lighter and lighter variations, right? Right? Does that make sense so far? This is like super basic light, where you have your intense, the point where it's like, so like, how can I say this? Let's say like the light will come down, it'll hit this point, and then you have this area right here will get the most intense light, and then it will fade out. Right? That's the basics of light. But then, so this is the easy one. Circles are really easy. That's why you do those circle sketches where someone will like take, here, watch this. It's super easy. You just bap it in, lock that puppy, and then, oh, Photoshop wants me to learn more. I don't want to learn more, right? That's all it is. You see that like that little focal point right here? That's what's happening in these circle studies. Right. Did I lose anybody yet? No, I hope not, because that's like the friggin' basics of light. Now, obviously, if you look to the left of this circle, you can see we have triangles and squares. Suddenly it gets weird, right? It's not that weird. So, triangles, like flat surfaces, are pretty much the same thing, but because they're flat, this gradient effect is less stark, right? Because you can almost think of it like, if this light is, coming down like this, you can kind of see how the object will line up with the lines. Do you see what I mean? Right? So like over here, because this line goes past the object, this is going to definitely be all shade. Make sense so far? And do you see what I'm talking about? Like, you have to start to learn to think in 3D shapes, because you have to like visualize the light in the space and then do some like math in your head where the light should be happening. Right? So like if we think about, the light coming down and hitting our triangle, right? You're going to see something like this. It'll be, let's make this a little lighter, and it'll be kind of like that. Right, see that? See how it kind of fades down? But it's much, much gentler because this is a flat surface. And theoretically, if this is all the same consistency of light coming down this way, this would probably look more continuous, right? Now, if you didn't have all of this consistent light, say you had like just like a little light bulb, right? We'll just get over this. Say there's just a light bulb right here. Boop, 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 boop. And it's just kind of doing this. Then on this triangle, get rid of all this noise. You're going to see that, like, if this is a very faint light bulb, right? You're going to see that is the wrong color. You're going to see that's the wrong color. You're going to see this kind of, you know, something more like this as you light it, because the light has this kind of weakness to it as it radiates. And then you might ask, well, what about this square, right? And don't worry, I'm going to get into some more examples here. So we move around, scoot and boot. With all this light. Because these so how can I say this? You're going to get what was the word? I think it's perpendicular. Sorry. So what I'm trying to say is if your light's coming down, this is where the squares get kind of interesting in angles, is if you, say, have a surface that does this against the light, it will be an even light distribution across the surface, right? But as this surface rotates away, like, you know, does this or this or this, you're going to get less light, right? So if I have a surface that, say, does this, right? This is my surface, could be whatever, could be like a cube pointing at it. The light along here is going to be consistent, right? This is all going to be the same light. And because this one here, this line is perpendicular, that's the word I was trying to get. Because it's perpendicular to the light, it will not get any light. Does that make sense? And so I was trying, it's kind of like almost like a math problem. So like the more that the surface will line up with the light that's coming towards it, the stronger and more consistent the light will be on that surface. Does that make sense, or have I gone off the rails? Someone tell me they're with me, please. Give me one yes in the chat, even if it's a lie. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to me. But like, does it make sense so far? This is like the really basic function of light. And I know light's a really complicated topic, so it's okay if if anybody is feeling like, huh, so far. Okay, so we lost Osaka. We are going to get into the light bouncing, right? I just want to get into the really basic function of how light works, right? So talking about like how this surface, the surface to light relationship changes how it happens. And by the same extent, you know, if I have like a circle, right? A circle is kind of like, you know, it will have, it has slight plane changes to it, right? And so it's like you take that function I just talked about, where maybe you have, you know, this is clearly going to get a light, and then these don't get light. A circle just takes that and makes it much more gentle, right? So like, for instance, you're going to get lots of light here, then less, and then it's going to sort of fade out, right? Lots of light, and then it's going to sort of fade out until you have, like right here, this part of the circle, this round object becomes perpendicular to the light, right? It's completely opposite. And of course, this region gets nothing, right? And then, of course, you can also, as I mentioned, this is all consistent light. If this light was not consistent, right, if it was doing something like this, you can think of each one of these lines as kind of creating their own sort of rules, right? So like, say you have this line, we'll do a little smaller, right? So I can actually fit it on the canvas. But if like there's a little object here, like say like a small LED or whatever, and it's putting light out, each one of these you can kind of think of as having its own little relationship with the objects around it, right? And each follow that rule. So if I put an object anywhere in this space, like say over here, right? Here's an object. We'll do a blue, right? Let's say there's an object right here that just happens to conveniently line up, right? Because this line is perpendicular, this area right here is all shade, right? But then we have this coming down. It's going to have like a focal point right here, and then it's going to fade, right? You see what I'm talking about? Is that making sense? How like each ray of light, depending how strong your light is, kind of creates these little relationships with the objects around it. It's like, are you getting some light bulbs? Right? So when you're doing your lighting, you can picture like a consistent stream of lines across your page, right? Like if I draw a character, oops. Right, here's my character. He likes you. Boop, boop. Oh, I'm just, whatever, just sketching this out really quick, right? You can think of your light doing this as you draw him. If you have a very strong, like, outdoor light source, right? And then, here, I'll make that a little better, right? If this is like our light source, they're all coming down very consistent. It's the sun or something, because the sun is like its own object doing this, right? But it's so bloody big that the Earth is only going to get these ones. Right? Even though the sun is radiating across this big, beautiful solar system of ours. Come on, everybody. Put your hands together for the sun. Right? So you can see like his arm is perpendicular to the light. So this is going to get lots of light. Right? His elbow is, let's use green, right? So it's parallel with the light. So this is going to get, this is not going to get as much light. Right? And that's the kind of thought process you have to use when you're doing light. Now, okay, we're going to change things up. He's standing next to a little itty bitty light bulb. All these things Satsu just said, not as relevant, right? So he's next to a light bulb. Boop, boop. And it's doing its light, right? You can imagine all of these little lines coming off it. Right? And you're going to get that same set of rules where, okay, this one's perpendicular, so we're going to get that. But because this light is weak, you're going to get, you know, something like that. Right? It's going to fade ever so slightly up the cylinder of his arm. Same thing. Okay, that one doesn't really have any light lining up with it, so this might not get as much here. And you just create this like slightly gentler set of rules because it's weaker light. Everybody with me? Ready to dive into some like ifs, ands, or buts of all this? Okay. Yeah, I know, perpendicular. So, to anybody that doesn't know, this is a parallel set of lines. Like these go in the same direction. And if they meet like this, they're perpendicular. That was the word I had to try to remember, right? It means the lines are opposite in terms of how they are lying down, I guess you'd call it. Right? They'd form an X. Right? If it was a set of cars, they would crash, right? You know, a T-bone accident, those cars are perpendicular. Don't be perpendicular with other cars. Be parallel with other cars. Yeah, thank you. Osaka here with the actual math linguistics. I'm just a lowly art teacher. If I was in high school, I would probably have an antagonistic relationship with the math teacher. We wouldn't like each other. Or we might secretly fall in love in some kind of cute rom-com situation, but only if she's hot, because I have standards. Anyway, moving on to rambling side. So let's set up some nice consistent light. Yeah, right. I only date hot math teachers because I am stuck up. Okay, so here's all our consistent light. We're going to start with consistent light. And we're going to do some random surfaces. So we're going to have a nice round one. And let's do, I don't know, let's do one that's slightly off. Here's one that matches completely. All right, I'm going to do kind of some random lines here. Triangle, let's do a triangle. Right, I'm just making random surfaces here, right? And I will show you how these work. And we'll see now. So what I want to introduce into your head is like how shade gets cast. How we throw shade at the enemy. Right? So, okay. Let's use blue for our shade, and we'll use pink for our worms. Okay. So when you're thinking about shade, right? If you imagine these lines as actual guidelines in your piece, they tell you where the shade goes, right? So you can see how these lines are coming down like this. We know that there's going to be some cast shade here coming off this, right? So this goes into shade. Shade, shade, shade. Throw that shade, right? We can see here, okay, line. That gives us some shade here, right? Shade, 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 shade. Right? And then we just keep following this concept of, is the line going with it or against it? So there might be a little bit of shade right here, right? This one, no, no, we're following, no, no, no. Okay, we're out of shade, right? So as you do these objects, that's where the casts, like the shade that is the cast shadow, is happening. Now, of course, okay, let's follow the lines of the light. Okay, we're gonna get a nice hard light here because that is perpendicular to the light, right? We're gonna get a, all right, so this is gonna be quite a hot piece of light here. This one is slightly off. So we're going to get probably a little lighter light here, right? This one meets the lines of light, so that's going to be pretty hot. This one here is it's pretty against it, so we're probably going to get like just the slightest bit, right? You starting to understand the logic here? Like how strong the light is how close the surface is to being perpendicular with the light. That makes sense? Does everyone get what Satsu's trying to put down? I'll even assign numbers to it. Maybe that's easier. Like this is a 10 for light, right? This one's a 10. This one might be a 7. This one might be a 3. When I say that, I mean like your intensity of light, right? So like here's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? See that? And so, well, we're going to get to bounce light, Simon, but I don't want to dive into that too quick because light is, as you've guessed, a little tricky dicky. Yes, I will definitely get this pick for people. So the rule is the more the line or the surface, sorry, the surface that we're talking about lines up with the light, the more it goes to 10, right? This relationship equals 10. Let's make sure the color's right. That's right. Here's light. Here's light. This is 10 for your light strength. This we can call 0. Not entirely true, but that's what this is, right? And so as this rotates, you change the degree of the intensity of the light, right? So like this one here is a 7 because the light comes in, and then we have a line that does this. Okay, well, it's not perpendicular, it's not parallel, it's kind of in between. So it's probably about a 6 or a 7, right? Everyone follow? I'm hopefully you're all nodding. I know you're all nodding because you're smart people and you deserve nice things. So, like for instance, this one here is just slightly facing the lines. So we'll probably do like a 1, right? Okay, this one's just a 1. I'll even draw this in for you, right? That's probably a 1. This one is just slightly facing away. Might be 8, right? And honestly, it might probably be like a 10. It's pretty close to it, right? So this area here would be a 10, and then because it's a circle, it fades off into 9, 8, 7, 6, blah, 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 blah. Same thing here, right? This is 10, 9, 8, blah, 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 right? That's how round surfaces work, right? Because they have that slight change of plane. This one here, we're going to get, now this here I'm going to mention a sort of, is corners catch 10s, right? Corners here usually catch a 10. 10, like right on these edges here. That's just because there's this interesting thing in 3D reality where because it's the point just happens to become like an intense surface. So if you think of like a nose, you know, when you draw human noses, right, and you look at noses, this area here tends to usually have a piece of specular light on it, almost always. That's because that little tip of your nose has like a little point to it, and it just catches light like a little net, right? And there's little areas like this all over the face where they just catch very intense light. That's because it's a point. And so coming back to lighting these things, right? So we light it. We're gonna just go and come in and, right? So this is maybe like a, or, you know, you come in and you light things. And remember that you will get little gradients, right? As things aren't facing the light so much. Now, time to make it stupid. As Simon pointed out, where's the bounce light? So let's turn this off for a sec and talk about bounce light. So I have two objects. Do you have two objects? No, I have two objects. Object 1, Object 2. Put this a little lower. Okay, so all our light's coming in. Bang, 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 bang. There's all our light, right? And we'll use some pink, whatever, right? So here's like this, right? It's catching all the light, it's catching all the light, catching all the light. Same thing here, light, light, light. Now, because light is not cool, as it hits surfaces, it actually bounces, right? It comes off it. Because light is like a little ping pong ball, right? So like you can imagine all these come down, like here's your focal point, it hits, bang, and then it shoots off in all these directions. And makes little mini rays of light, which is where light gets really stupid. And what's going to happen is this light is going to hit this part of this object, right? And now because it's a bounce light, every time it bounces, it loses strength, right? So if this is the sun, it's coming down, bang, bang, bang. It's like 10 strength light coming down, bang, bang, bang. It hits a 10 right here, right? Here's your 10 right in the middle. And as it bounces off, maybe it only does like a 4. You could even say maybe you could like half it. Every time it bounces, it halves, right? So then, okay, we'll only do 5 intensity light on the back of this, right? And it's going to just be ever so slight. Right? Okay, there's a 5 there. This is not necessarily the case, but this is just to get the idea across. And it gets dumber because I'm not done. This will also, every one of these lines will bounce a little bit too, right? And of course, you have to think about that relationship of, is it perpendicular or parallel? So this one here will bounce ever so slightly stronger than here, right? Because this one might bounce off a little bit. And you might actually get just the slightest hint of light on this object from this object's bounce light, right? Something to keep in mind as you're playing with this. And the bounce light will, of course, keep a little bit of the color qualities. So like if this thing had been green, if this one was green, you'd see a little bit of green right here, right? And so when you do these, you know, if you were to like place an orange on a blue table in the sunlight, you're going to see orange light all over the place. Right? Does that answer your question about bounce light? That's how that works. So if we come back to our example here, boop, boop. Right, yeah, okay. So if we're talking about our objects here again, and we look at this, every one of these surfaces actually has light bouncing off it, right? Because every one of these lines comes down, hits, and bounces. Every one of these lines has bounce light, like little raindrops hitting it, right? And that's your bounce light. And so in this way, Like here's a line of light coming down, a bunch of light, boop, boop. Every one of these bounces. So they actually have slight light hitting this object, right? So if we say, let's say this object here was blue, or no, we did blue. It's green, right? So this object is green. This green light will bounce onto this surface, right? So this, and it gets dumber. It gets dumber. Watch, right? So this yellow light comes down and hits this green surface, and each one of these bounces off. Okay, so we get a little bit here. This surface is going to be purple. Right, there's going to be a purple surface. When you do this bounce light, and I'm not going to do this yet, I just want to put this idea in your head. The green of this object, you have to think about how this green interacts with this purple, right? How do I mix a little bit of green into purple? That's how you get the color for this object. And it gets dumber because if you take into account the color, that's the light's color, right? So if this is yellow light hitting a green object, and that yellow light that mixes into the green, and then that green then bounces onto the purple, suddenly you have to like think about how do I mix all these colors, and we'll get into that. But this is where light gets very dumb and why we're not doing color just yet. So far, do we understand the concepts of just how light hits objects, bounces, and then the intensity of the light and the bounce light? Are we following that so far? Looks like I'm doing math, doesn't it? Kind of are, honestly. Yeah, fun, right? So let's move away from this for a sec and talk about like an actual object, right? So let's turn this off. Boop, boop. That's there. That's cool. Okay, I don't want that. I don't like that one. If we talk about, say, an arm. Arms are easy. Okay. So let me sketch out an arm for you. How do we light an arm? Or maybe like a, let's do some, say an arm with like a shoulder pad so we get some, right, so I'm going to just sketch out an arm. Everyone just bear with me while I do this. There's an arm. Boop, boop, and we'll put a shoulder pad on here, right? I don't know, with some surfaces. With a big buckle, right? I don't know, like some pirate Viking. I don't know, I'm making this up. Okay. It's a little cleaner. Okay. Make sure our planes are nice and clear. And this guy is ripped, okay? Because that'll help us learn. Okay, everyone see the arm? Right? Cool. Everyone see what's going on? Here's a nipple for a landmark. Neck, right? We all see that? Good. I'm sure we all see it. Okay. So, as we think about light and how to color our character, right? So we're going to just pick nice, easy light from the side, just sunlight. No fancy LEDs, no light bulbs, no bounce, no rim light. Well, there will be bounce light, but no rim light. Because you can have multiple light sources, which is fun, right? So, the first thing I like to do is think about where would cast shadow be. So, as you think about this light coming down, well, we see this shoulder pad here is going to have some cast shadow, right? It's going to do this. Now, you don't color in this part. You just color on the actual object. So we see there's a cast shadow here coming down. Okay, so it should do this, right? So there's our cast shadow off the shoulder pad. Part one. We see that there's this object, this arm here, that's blocking light coming down. Okay, so where does that hit on our body? Probably like here, right? Because there's shadow being cast by this object. Now we know that this arm is a cylinder, right? Okay, so then that means on this side that we're going to see this kind of behavior. And this is where you follow the muscles, right? You actually start following the muscles. Cast shadow, cast shadow. You see how this process works? You just kind of think about as the object is existing in 3D space against the light, and then you just kind of start blocking it in. You have to start thinking like 3D forms. This is what I was talking about. Like, you know, you see these objects, you're like, I don't really know what's going on. And so if you think about these 3D objects in space, you'll realize things like, well, this chest, like the chest from the side, like here's a nipple. I'm looking at the side. It's going to bump in like this. Here's the shoulder, right? This is the shoulder. Here's the front of the chest here. And then here's the abs. There's this bump here where this part of the chest will have cast shadow because this is a 3D object. Everyone follow? Makes sense? Why you have to think about these things in 3D spaces, you like them? Because they have form to them, right? There's different planes. Make sense? You guys with me? If you have any questions and I'm going too fast, please just say something. I don't want you guys to be confused. Right? So this is how you light. You just think about the form in 3D space, and what shade does, it helps create that sense of form, right? So if I like have that pec, right? Here's like a pec. Here's a shoulder, nipple. Because there's that form here, you can use shade to show that it's moving away. Like shade, when you see it, suggests that something is moving away from the viewer in 3D space. Even though like the cleft of a human chest, of a pectoral muscle, is very slight compared to something like a piece of armor, this slight hint of shade under the pec will still tell the viewer that this is moving away from them in 3D space, right? And light says it's coming towards you, generally, when you're doing these kinds of things, right? So back to shading our shoulder pad. We see this is a round object. So we know that there's going to be more intense light here, and it's going to radiate out and fade. That also means there's going to be shade here, right? Okay, so we shade that part. Right? Lighting, lighting, lighting. So we know that this is going to be like this, right? That's how we light that. This is a cylinder, and you know, quick aside, the way we light the objects of a cylinder is, you know, you guys must know your basic shapes here. Do I need to go over this? Right? This is the hot part. This is the shaded part, right? Arm's a cylinder, so same kind of logic follows, where you have a little band down the middle, right? And then this catches more. Right? That all making sense so far? We kind of see how that works. Should I keep going, or do you get the point? We all got the basic idea? This is kind of really like the basics of light. This is the super basics of light. I see typing, I see typing, I see typing. Ooh, that's a loud chair. You guys hear that? It's like I'm on a ship creaking on the ocean or something. Arr. Arr. Yeah, okay. I thought you were gonna talk about light. You're just saying my chair is squeaky. Yeah. So when you're coloring your characters, you just think about those. Where are they? Here we go. This kind of stuff, right? You just sort of think about what the planes of the surface are doing, and then sort of do your light math in your head, right? That's how we survived this. And there's no real limit to this. Like if, you know, you're doing the human arm, you can think of the arm as just a cylinder, right? But if you want to get stupid, well, you can go, there's actually multiple cylinders, because you can think of the tricep as its own cylinder. You can think of the oh, I forgot the middle muscle again. The brachialis, I believe. Anyways, the middle muscle here of the arm as its own, and you can even think of the bicep as its own cylinder, right? Coming down into the forearm. This is the forearm, right? And you can think of the top of the shoulder because it has, right? It comes in here. There's the middle of the shoulder has its own muscle. The back of the shoulder has its own sort of area. So each one of these of an arm can be its own object that's catching light, right? So this is the shoulder up here, and you're going to see this area here all covered in shade, right? And this part's all gonna be light. Light. Light, right? See that? And there's no real end to this. If, for instance, you're doing your character here, okay, we got this, we got this, we got this, right? Lighting this all up. Here's the bicep. Right? A little bit of shade, a little bit of shade. You could put veins on this puppy, and all of a sudden that vein, which we'll just zoom right in, doodle-doodle-doo, suddenly that little vein you're putting in has its own set of rules as a little itty-bitty cylinder. So, okay, he's got some vascularity. This vein, we're going to blow it up. This vein snaking across that bicep, this is a little vein here, will have its own set of cylinder rules. See what I mean? How there's no end to this? But it shouldn't be too bad because you just keep thinking of it as the basic shapes, right? Does that help illuminate light characters? Any questions so far? Because that's pretty much it for this first one. I can keep going on these, but then it gets kind of redundant. Yeah, right. And that's all it is. Like even like the the little pores and imperfections in your skin are following these rules. Now, something to say. When you're doing this and you're looking at a character in their full view, you're not going to put really strong shade on veins. It's going to be very slight, right? You want to think about the major forms first. Light the major forms and then add little subsequent subsidiary, auxiliary, secondary shade areas to accent the main forms, right? This will make more sense as you practice. Yeah, for instance, that guy right there, that guy is so shredded that the little bands of muscle fibers follow their own little rules of cylinders, right? That's a great example, Osaka. It's exactly what I was getting at. Like depending on so don't get too attached to, it's an arm. Think more of these shapes and then light them appropriately. And there's really only, I'll end this by talking about the main shapes. You have your round shapes, spheres, right? You have pyramids, right? You have cubes or square objects. They might not always be cubes. And then you have cylinders, right? And as much as these are, these are like the classic shapes, I don't really want you to think about why isn't his shoulder made of pyramids or where's the cylinders? I want you to only think in flat and round surfaces because that'll help you catch all the variations that can happen, right? These are good for, just kind of getting the basics in for doing drills and stuff. But think in round surfaces and flat surfaces relative to the source of light. Right? So, as I was talking about, you light your cylinder. Right? Light it. There it is. You do this whole thing. Right? It's a lit cylinder. Think about this as there's a round side and a flat side. That's how I like to think about it, because then it gives you much more flexibility when you actually draw, right? Okay, well, I would say that's the first lecture. Do you guys have any questions? Any pieces that you feel like I've missed? Do you have what feels like the basics of light? If I gave you a cube, could you light it? If I gave you the picture of a cube, would you go, I understand what's happening here? Good. Okay. Good. Good. Loving these yeses. Good. 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 Important question. Did we learn something about light today? We did. We learned some things. Good. Yes. Okay. So let's get into the Q&A.